I'm just going to quickly run through some work we did through the drinks cluster and really to help the producers in Wales that are working with us as part of that cluster to trade better in the on-trade. A lot of this work was done pre-COVID, and obviously has presented a few challenges for us across the last 12 months. So we'll briefly touch on that as well. So in terms of who Levercliff are and what we do, well, in simplistic terms, Levercliff makes category management best practice and accessible for all food and drink SMEs. So it's about understanding the category, understanding the opportunities, and that picture there is taken from the food and drink in Scotland. A lot of number of suppliers there that we've been working with as part of the ASDA Academy, that's getting them into a better place in terms of understanding their products and the market. In simple terms around category management, the objective of it is for all of us really to hit the bullseye. If we understand our markets and we understand our consumers and we understand the areas that we're trading in, it gives us huge potential in terms of maximizing sales and profits as a business. And ultimately, I suppose what we're all looking for is happy consumers alongside happy customers. And the whole category management piece means that if we understand that, we understand the market that we're in, we can actually please both parties and do a successful job. Now, category management also provides the insights and foundations around successful innovation. And if you look at this kind of slide from the gramophone to where we are now with cloud-based, customers are always looking for bigger and better solutions to their problems. And better means more happy consumers and ultimately more sales, which is what we're all looking for. And I suppose it's really a three-step process for us. It is about getting the research and insight right, developing a strategy, and then making sure we've got the skills in place to deliver that and optimize it. Now, a lot of this work that went on was done as a separate project as part of the Innovation Action in Partnership project, but feeding into the drinks cluster. And the drinks cluster has about 150 members in Wales and operates around 4 different groups. So a beer and cider group, which this work was predominantly done with, a wine and spirit group, 2 groups there, and then really a non-alcoholic water, soft drinks, hot and emerging market sector. So the aim of the project was for us to fully understand why there's poor availability of Welsh beers throughout pubs, restaurants, hotels in Wales. And we did this project with a real clear vision about making sure that we had a Welsh brewed beer available on every bar for every drinking occasion. And as well as the Levercliff team doing the insight and understanding this, we worked with 4 of the major players within the drinks cluster and the beer group: Rumney Brewery, Snowdon Craft, Monty's, Velin and Purple Moose, to get a good understanding of the business in terms of how they were supplying and to identify opportunities that we could roll out across the rest of the producers. Our approach took place across 5 steps. Firstly, understanding where the Welsh beer and cider producers were now and how they fitted into the marketplace. We wanted to understand the on-trade performance in terms of where that was, and understand the structure of the industry as well. From that, then we did some analysis around listings, both in the on and off trade, to understand opportunities, and that then drove us to a number of conclusions and opportunities. So in terms of the overview of the industry itself, the beverage industry is actually the largest food and drink segment of the UK market. And I suppose, whilst it's a huge market, it's 24% of the total GVA, but only 16% of SMEs trading in that area. So it highlights a few potential issues, as there's a large number of big companies in that area, which makes it slightly difficult for Welsh SMEs to play in that arena. We looked at obviously the producers that we have, and there are circa around about 135 beer and cider producers in Wales, and we categorised them from micro businesses right the way through to large enterprises. And as you can see, 85% of the enterprises in Wales are either micro or small businesses, which means that there's a high level of competition throughout Wales. And also, there's a real challenge around driving overall awareness with smaller producers with probably lesser marketing capabilities and needs. We also mapped it by region in Wales, and this was quite an interesting one, where again, we tried to map the numbers that we had by the population density that we had in Wales to understand again where there were opportunities in that area. And there tends to be a greater proportion of breweries in North Wales and Mid Wales, showing that there's a lot stronger competition in that area. I think the other thing that does have a massive effect in terms of the number of breweries in this area is it tends to be quite seasonal as well. And I'm sure Dylan's will have seen this, that, you know, we get an awful lot of holiday trade in the North Wales area. So it tends to be quite boom and bust, difficult over the winter months, but more beneficial to producers over the summer months. In terms of the on-trade performance, I think this was the first time when we did this piece of work that we actually engaged with CGA. So we worked with Phil before, and we started to buy some CGA data to really understand the market. And it was clear to see that whilst value was going up, there was still an issue with volume in terms of trying to drive volume through that market. We then looked at all of the categories in there. So whilst this work was predominantly focused on beer, we looked at the other areas to try and understand if we were losing out to some of the other sectors. The structure of the on-trade in Wales, again, just trying to understand that, to understand how we would approach outlets in Wales in terms of getting more of those beers on those bars. And there's 3 tiers of pubs in Wales. One through managed outlets, which tend to be part of the bigger groups. So your your big pub chains, your Wetherspoons, etc. And really only a handful of Welsh breweries have the scale or ambition to actually supply into this area. We also looked at managed pubs, so independent free trade venues, and there's a large number of these in Wales. But again, based on the number of small suppliers we have, this is a very, very competitive area in which people are trading. And then we also looked at the non-managed or leased pubs, and these are kind of the middle ground where there are some opportunities in this area, but they tend also to be tied into contracts from the bigger breweries as well. Now, when you look at how Wales looks in comparison to GB in terms of outlets, there's some good news here because Wales has a larger share of freehold outlets in Wales, with nearly 75% of the pubs freely available to trade with whichever producers they want to. But on the flip side of that, the free trade in Wales is declining, and the non-managed pubs, the leasehold pubs, are also declining. So we have a number of smaller brewers trying to get into pubs that actually are declining in sales. And the challenge for us really is how we influence the bigger players in the managed sector, because the managed sector is harder to get into, but that's where the growth is coming from. So a real challenge in this area to try and get the producers in the right place. We also looked to get that again by region. And I suppose one of the things that we saw was actually all regions in Wales were declining. North Wales probably more than most. So a real challenge to make sure that across Wales we had one plan that we could roll out across the board. We then look at how Welsh beer and cider brands featured in the on-trade versus the off-trade. And what we can see is that there's, the on-trade are doing the off-trade, so retailer as convenience chains, symbols, etc., are doing a much, much better job with Welsh brands and Welsh products than the on-trade is. So again, it shows that we have the ranges, we're just not getting them into the right venues and outlets. We also then did analysis with CAMRA from their Good Beer Guide to understand what brands were sold in Wales. And when you look at this slide, it's actually showing that there's more English brands in Welsh pubs than there are Welsh brands. So plenty of room for development in this area. We also looked at guest pump sourcing. And again, what we can see from this is that there's a number of guest pump slots across different regions within Wales. But again, those guest pump slots tend to be going to brands outside of Wales and not Welsh producers. So again, an opportunity for us, if we can get it right, to try and grow sales in this area. So, conclusions and opportunities. I think the key thing when we worked on this project was to make sure that A, we had a clear vision around what we were trying to achieve, but also that we had the people and expertise in place, not only to understand the data, but to understand the market and the approach that we took. So the formation of the team that we had with a very, very 5 experienced brewers alongside people who were used to reading, understanding and drawing conclusions for data really helped in the delivery of this project. It certainly helped us get towards a Welsh brewed beer available on every bar for every drinking occasion. And what it did was it highlighted to us in the on-trade a number of specialist wholesalers to work with to do this. So we've kicked off projects with Templeton's in West Wales, with Joseph Keegan in North Wales and Liquid Measure in South Wales, to put in place a brewing programme where we can have regular guest ales, regular Welsh ales in as brewer of the month, and feature ales. So by increasing the number of Welsh beers into the specialist drinks producers that are supplying into the on-trade, it gives us a potential to increase beers into those areas. Now, this project was ready to go around March, April time as we hit COVID, so kind of scuppered some of that work with those producers, but we're now talking to them to get that program in place for when hopefully the hospitality sector comes back into play towards the summertime or autumn time this year, excuse me. We've also then, to help the producers, similar to the diversification that you've seen at Dillon's, we've done a lot of work as a cluster in terms of online trading. We kicked off with Welsh Wine Week last summer, and that's now evolved into the Welsh Drinks Christmas website and an online portal to try and help drive sales. And then since the success of the Christmas trade, where we took over £500,000 from 26 producers that shared their volumes with us, we've now rolled out Drink Welsh as a website that's now giving consumers access to all of the drinks cluster suppliers direct into people's websites and allowing to buy Welsh drinks online. We've also done a lot of work around retail and had great support from the food innovation centres across Wales here. We've now kicked off a bespoke programme for drinks cluster suppliers where we have 13 of our suppliers working towards salsa. And by improving accreditation across that sector, we're going to open them up to do more retail business and hopefully to get into more wholesalers as well. And we've also done a considerable amount of work with the Export Club by increasing the number of producers, I think again by over a dozen, that are now working with the Export Club to try and drive trade overseas. So we're not sat back reliant on the on-trade reopening to try and drive sales. We're trying to keep the suppliers afloat by doing as much as we can in these other areas. And when the on-trade comes back, we'll be ready to trade in that sector as well. And that is me. Thank you very much.